These words of Messing were feared to be published. Why? Because behind them lies something more than just a man's opinion. Behind them, fear. Fear of a truth people are not ready to hear. Fear of a reality that had been hidden for decades. When Wolf Messing first spoke about what he saw after death, the audience froze. No one dared to interrupt him. Some didn't even breathe. And then the recording disappeared. Those who were present that evening said, "This could not be forgotten." We realized it wasn't just a man speaking to us, it was someone who had already looked beyond the veil. But what exactly did he say then? Why were those in power so frightened? And why did these words never reach the wider public? First, it is worth understanding who Wolf Messing was. Not just an illusionist, not just a mentalist. He was invited to meet with Stalin. His opinion was heard by generals. He predicted the future, precisely, frighteningly, without error. But there was something else about him, something special. He claimed that he could communicate with the souls of the departed, and this, he believed, was the most terrifying part of his gift. People fear death because they don't know what lies beyond. But I know, he once said. It was backstage, in a cramped dressing room that smelled of powder and dusty stage fabric. There were 5 people in the room. 3 later refused to speak of that evening. 1 died under strange circumstances. The 5th remained silent until the end of his life, and later left letters. And in them, everything that Messing had said that night. He began with something simple. Death is not the end, but neither is it what books promise you. With those words, the room fell silent. Messing looked at his listeners as if scanning their souls. And then he said, "When the body dies, the soul does not leave immediately. It stays for 3 days. Sometimes more. It wanders. It searches for answers. It sees who cries, who rejoices, who remembers, and who has already forgotten. The soul needs this in order to understand everything has truly ended." These words caused shock. One of those present asked, "And then what? What happens after those 3 days?" Messing fell silent for a long time, as if he didn't want to speak. And then softly, almost in a whisper, "Then judgment. Not the one painted on icons. Not golden gates and not a demon with a pitchfork. Judgment of the soul by itself. Everything you have done, everything you have felt, returns to you. You relive your life again, only this time through the eyes of those you caused pain and joy. You don't just remember, you feel." And then he said the most important part. The very reason, perhaps, we started this conversation. And then you choose to return or to leave. Not everyone can return. Some do not want to. Some cannot forgive themselves. These words stunned the listeners. One of them, a writer, tried to include this monologue in a book. The editor got scared. The publisher refused. Later, the manuscript disappeared. The author himself suddenly emigrated and never wrote again. Coincidence? But why did Messing suddenly decide to share this? Why then? There is a theory. He knew his time was coming to an end. He felt the approach of his death, and he wanted the truth to remain, for someone to hear it. We live as if death is somewhere far away, as if it doesn't concern us. But Messing knew it is close, it watches, and waits for the moment to ask you, are you ready to look truth in the eye? When a person hears for the first time that the soul remains nearby after death, they smile, skeptically, as if it were a fairy tale for old people and overly sensitive women. But this is what Messing said. You may not believe, but that will not change what will happen to you. Faith changes nothing. Truth changes everything. These words didn't sound like a sermon, not like a threat, but like a sentence, cold like steel, and just as precise. One of the witnesses to his revelation wrote in a diary, "When he spoke, it felt like the walls were breathing, as if we were not alone, as if someone or something was listening, was present, knew exactly what would happen next." He later burned that diary, but a few pages were preserved. They were secretly passed from hand to hand, like a relic. They mentioned something else. Messing said that sometimes souls do not leave. They cannot, not out of malice, not because of attachment, but because no one calls them. These words are a riddle, but hidden in them is something the ancients knew for thousands of years. A soul lives as long as it is remembered, as long as it is called by name, as long as people say, "I love you, forgive me, I miss you." And he added, "Oblivion is the most terrible death, not the second one, the real one." Messing knew that in the future a time would come when people would begin to lose their connection with souls. That technology would distract, city noise would drown out the inner voice. And then it wouldn't just be memory that disappears, meaning would disappear. He predicted, man will live as if eternal, and then, suddenly, he will realize that he has lost everything. Not when he dies, but when he stands before someone he hasn't remembered for decades and says nothing, because there is nothing to say. Among his notes, and not all of them were destroyed, as people thought, one phrase remained. It repeats like a refrain. We return to the place where we are still awaited. What does this mean? Perhaps it refers to reincarnation. Perhaps to a spiritual connection. But it doesn't sound like a theory, but like an experience. A lived moment. Something he saw himself. There were rumors that he would leave during sleep. For hours, he would lie motionless. His breathing would slow. Doctors could not explain this state. And then he would wake up and say he had been visiting, whom he did not specify. But once he said, "She is no longer alone. It is quiet there now, warm." He said it with such tenderness, as if he had just returned from his mother. Messing never imposed his views. He shared them, like someone who had carried it too long inside. He said, "Don't be afraid to ask yourself questions. Be afraid to live without them." Psychologists who later listened to fragments of these revelations, a recording that survived only in part, admitted, "No madman speaks like that. This was someone who knows more than he can explain." And then something strange happened. One of those who was near Messing in his final years said that a week before his death he was whispering something in an unknown language. Then, suddenly, in clear Polish, he said, "We'll see each other soon." With whom? With those who had waited? With those who remained? No one knows. But his final words were, "Remember, it is not as you think, but also not as you fear." That is the main key. We look for precise patterns. Heaven, hell, tunnel, light. But the truth, according to Messing, is more complex and more frightening, because it lies within us. Everything that happens after death, we build during life, with our actions, our thoughts, words spoken and unspoken. After his death, there remained a strange sense of incompleteness, as if he had left without finishing, as if he wanted to pass something on, but didn't manage to. His students, few in number and secretive, claimed he knew when he would leave. He even chose the day. But the most important thing, he left signs. Those who could see understood. Messing had passed on more than just words. An elderly actress who had once known him well recalled, "He gave me a box, said open it when I'm gone. I thought he was joking. I forgot. Years later I found it in the attic. I opened it. There was only a note, on yellowed paper, in his handwriting, 'You don't die, you return.' frightening perhaps, but only if you live without realizing what comes next. Messing said the most dangerous thing for the soul is not evil. It is emptiness, the ordinary, when you pass by another's pain, when you forget to ask for forgiveness, when you don't keep your word. All of this, not mistakes. These are holes. Through them, the soul begins to leak even during life. He stated, "There are people who die long before death. Their soul switches off, so to speak, because they no longer live in the present, only in fear, in routine, and in habit." And he added, "But there are also those who live even after they're gone. They are felt, they are heard, sometimes in a dream, sometimes through music, sometimes in silence. Surely you've noticed, a person long gone suddenly comes to mind, without reason, just an image, a scent, a word. That is not just memory, that is a touch. The soul has come. Why? Sometimes to say goodbye, sometimes to remind, sometimes to warn. In the archives of one of his students, a diagram was discovered, something like a map. It had nothing in common with religion. No angels, no demons, only levels, states, and short notes. Pain, understanding, acceptance, forgiveness, light. This map allegedly described the soul's path after death. Each level, like a step, but not upward or downward, inward, deeper, toward the self. Messing wrote, "You do not meet God, not judges, not ancestors. First you meet yourself, the real you, without masks, without lies, without excuses. And that's when the judgment begins, the most terrifying one, because you can no longer lie." In these words, not propaganda, not philosophy, but a bitter truth. Because if you think deeply, what we fear most is not the dark. It is the meeting with ourselves, when all roles disappear and only who you became remains. Once, in a private conversation, he confessed, "You know what I've seen? People who died in fear get lost. Their souls become confused. They wander between worlds, they call out, they scream, but no one hears because no one believes. And faith is the door. Without it, everything is closed." He did not preach religion. He asked us to remember. Every day you are building your life after death, like a brick or like a wound. Everything you do will remain not in someone else's memory, but in yours, because you will return and live it all again. Doesn't that give you chills? We think everything ends, but he said, nothing ends. Everything continues. Only by then you will no longer be able to pretend that you didn't see, didn't hear, didn't feel. Sometimes Messing spoke in riddles. "There are places," he said, "where only those who didn't finish can go." People asked him, "Finish what?" He replied, "Themselves." This is not mysticism. This is deep meaning. According to him, if a person leaves this life with pain, with resentment, with hatred, they get stuck. Not in hell, no. In a state, as if everything has stopped, frozen, and the soul cannot move forward until it lets go of what it held onto in life. One of the listeners recalled, he told a story about a woman who couldn't leave. She kept returning to the house where she had lived. She frightened the residents, whispered to the children. It seemed like she was evil, but in reality she was just waiting for forgiveness, for a single word. And when that word was spoken, she disappeared. Forever. Messing warned, do not die with unsettled accounts. Do not leave words unspoken. Do not depart with hatred in your heart. It holds tighter than chains. But he also spoke of something else, that sometimes souls return, voluntarily, to help, to guide, to finish what was started. He stated, "Some become guardians. You cannot see them, but you can feel them. They are near when you are alone. They give hints when you stand at a crossroads. Sometimes it's your father. Sometimes a friend. Sometimes someone you didn't even know in life. But you are their continuation." Once, during a performance that suddenly turned into a confession, he fell silent, looked around the audience and said, "In this hall 10 people are being watched by someone, not with malice, not with reproach, but with hope. They are waiting for you to take a step, to choose a path." At the time, no one took it seriously, but later several people admitted that their lives changed after those words. One left his business and became a volunteer. Another reconciled with his mother after 20 years of silence. A third adopted a child. All 3 claimed it felt like someone had whispered to them from within. This is what Messing called bridges. There are bridges between worlds. They are thin like spider webs, but strong like steel. Not only souls walk on them, love moves across them, memory, thoughts, sometimes a prayer, sometimes tears. All of it reaches, all of it is heard. He was convinced no one disappears without a trace, even the most forgotten, even those whose names are no longer spoken. As long as someone thinks of you, you are alive. As long as your voice is heard in someone's dreams, you exist, not in the body, but in essence. With one of his students, a young woman with a rare gift of empathy, he once shared, "You will feel it when someone departs unfinished. It will feel like a pain in your chest, like a worry without a reason. Don't push that feeling away. Listen. Sometimes it's a call." These words are not for everyone. Many find it easier to laugh, to wave it off, to call it nonsense. But those, in his opinion, were the ones who feared the most. Laughter is armor, skepticism, a shield. But when you are alone with yourself, all of that disappears, and that's when your true conversation begins, with those who left, with who you are, with who you were, and with who you are meant to become. He never said directly what happens after death. He only let you feel it, with small hints, half phrases, and in that was his power. Toward the end of his life, Messing grew increasingly silent, not because he had nothing left to say, but because he knew much would no longer be understood. In one of his final conversations, he quietly said, "I have spoken. Now, listen, but not with your ears, with your heart." He knew that his words would be distorted, retold with pomp, with mysticism, with fabricated details. But he wasn't afraid of that. The truth will find its way regardless, even if it's buried, even if a wall is built over it. It's like water. First it drips, then it wears down, and then it washes everything away. Some claimed that just before his death, he did say something that outsiders were not supposed to hear. His nurse said, it was as if he were talking to someone, as if he saw someone nearby, and he smiled. Then he looked toward the corner of the room and said, "Now you see how simple it is," and fell still. But what were those words? Why were people so afraid to speak about them? Why are some archives still classified to this day? Perhaps because Messing revealed the most important truth, that a person is given the power to cross over, and not just after death, but during life. Each of us, he said, lives on the border, between light and shadow, between body and spirit, between word and silence. The question is not what awaits us, but what we bring with us when we get there. He gave no recipes. made no promises of salvation, didn't say, "Do this and all will be well." He simply whispered, "Wake up. You're already there. You're already building your eternity, not when you die, but when you forgive, when you cry, when you choose good, for no reason. That's when you cross, by bridge, quietly, without pomp, but forever." One person whom Messing once touched on the hand said years later, "I didn't know it was possible, but I felt him open a door inside me, a small one, a thin one. And since then I know that death is not an enemy. It is continuation, if you're ready." This perhaps is the hardest thing to grasp. Death should not be the end, and not the beginning, but a turning point, a moment when you finally see everything, hear everything, understand everything, and can no longer look away. Messing left behind not only legends and fears, he left a hint, a code, a key. In one of his notebooks, among scattered drawings and words, as if written randomly, was one phrase circled 3 times. "Those who are ready do not die. They simply move on." That is the system's greatest fear. Not the afterlife, but inner freedom. The realization that a human being is not a cog, not a body, but a spirit, and that spirit cannot be controlled once it awakens. He knew that his words would stir debate, that they would be denied, twisted, mocked, but none of that mattered, because the one who once heard can never forget. Somewhere deep inside, like a scar or a light, it remains. And now, a question, not to him, to you. Are you ready to look at your life through the eyes of those who will remember you? Are you ready if you must live it all again, but on the other side? Are you ready to answer yourself, honestly without masks, for everything you didn't do, didn't say, didn't feel? If yes, you are already on the path. If no, think again, while there is still time. Because, as Messing said, it all begins not when your eyes close, but when you finally open them for real. If what you just heard made you think, that's no accident. If you felt something familiar, quiet, but strong inside, then this conversation was for you. Give this video a like if you believe the soul lives on. Leave a comment. Tell us if there's something in your life that defies logic. And be sure to subscribe, because more stories are coming. Ones that don't fit within the usual bounds. And if you feel that someone is near, just say silently, "I remember you." Sometimes, that's enough.